Okay, this next subtopic here is going to talk about is going to go from the early '90s to basically 2013. Right now, I talk about Cyprus and what's going on with the Cypriot banking system and why that crisis sort of came about. Um, from the fall of the Berlin Wall, the collapse of the Soviet Union, all the creation of all these new democratic governments, nations in the early 1990s, the European Union really went through sort of a golden age. There was a lot of talk that we may get that there could be the creation of this sort of United States of Europe, where national boundaries would still exist, they would still be there, but the European citizens would really um, uh, call themselves Europeans first. French second, German second, English second, Irish second, um, and that was people were people who looked at this, and Europeans and Americans who sort of historians and political scientists said this was a possibility. Seems far less likely now. And why is that? Why are these sort of tensions there? There's a lot of reasons. Certainly, the sort of financial crisis has widened these cracks, right? You have sort of some of the older European nations, Germany and England, and the French to a lesser extent, complaining about some of these new European countries or newly admitted to the European Union, saying they're not as disciplined as us. They're not quite ready to sort of maybe we let some of these nations in too quickly, and they don't want to quote unquote bail them out. And a bailout is not free money, right? It is essentially really cheap loans. And some of these nations say, look, you, Germany, they might say, this is what some Greek citizens would say, and economists would say the same thing, that the Germans have benefited from Greece being in, because what happened is the European Union is first and foremost an economic system or an economic entity of free trade. And when some of these poorer nations joined, you got access to cheap labor that German firms could move some of their plants to Greece, to Italy, southern Italy. Northern Italy is labor still not much more cheap, not much cheaper than it is in Germany, but certainly southern Italy is still relatively poor, and sort of agrarian. That you can move companies there and make things that would still be made in Europe, and it would be a lot cheaper. And then that, of course, makes these products cheaper for Germans and French to buy. So they say, look, you benefited from that. We benefited, but so did you. You got sort of cheap labor, and the price of some of your products went down. The price of some of your foodstuffs might have went down. And now we need to sort of help because our economy is not as large. And these but so that tension is there, and we'll have to see where that goes. There's a relatively recent book about the sort of what's going on in the European Union, which I read, which and this author sort of pointed to the real sort of or the beginning of the end, if you will, or maybe not the beginning of the end. The beginning of this rising tension was the Iraq War. That some of these Eastern European nations were very much supportive of the Iraq War, and the United States and France, Germany were not, right, and that tension, instead of sort of saying agreeing to disagree, it became politicized. It became the Eastern European nation sort of said, well, you in the West don't know what it's like to sort of live under sort of a authoritarian totalitarian regime like Iraq is. And these Western European nations said, "Well, your history is far too rife with when you want something done using military means to get it done. Um, you know, not necessarily really a fair criticism of either side by either side, but it became sort of a political football that they sort of punted back and forth. Um, you know, I think there's quite a bit of there's certainly some validity to that, but certainly the financial crisis has made this far um, more prevalent. Um, so you're going to read, there's an article about some Cyprus citizens, what they think about what's going on, and an op-ed written by an observer who sort of talks about the failure of political leadership, right? This is analogous to when I talked about World War II and Chamberlain, right? That Chamberlain gets blamed, and rightfully so in a lot of ways for sort of appeasing Hitler, but he was also doing what the majority of English citizens wanted, and this is sort of the problem with how we talk about our politicians. On the one hand, we want them to, we say, look, you should do what sort of the polling says. You should do what the majority of citizens want, and yet we also sometimes criticize leaders for, look, the majority may not be on your side, but you need to do what's right, and of course, neither, we always sort of criticize them after the fact, right? If the majority of people were wrong, they may say, well, that was a failure of political leadership. They should have stood up and did, even though 70%, didn't want to do X. They should have gone against the grain and made the difficult decision. And then on the other hand, when they do that and it turns out to not work out, they may say, see, we told you, 70% of us didn't want to do that. Why did you were sort of caught up in your own power or something. We always criticize them, and that's fair. But we also ask these politicians. They are representatives of us. They're really sort of projections of us. So it's really it's sort of a no-win situation in a way. So we'll have to see. These Angela Merkel of Germany and I was going to say Sarkozy of France. Man, I forgot his name. I can see his face too. Anyway, the president of France. They're wrestling with this, right? A lot of their citizens don't want to continue to bail out some of these nations that are in trouble, but some of the economists and their finance ministers are sometimes saying one thing publicly, but saying, look, it could be worse for us if we don't bail them out, right? Because here's the thing: the Greeks, for example, owe a lot of money in bonds. If the Greeks say, you know what, heck with it, we're going to leave the euro, we're going to leave the European Union, all that debt would go bad, right? They would essentially be sort of declaring a bankruptcy and saying, we're not paying any of it. And German firms, German companies, German governments, investments, you have all these German citizens who have retirements and investment accounts, maybe 10% of that is in some of that Greek debt. That all of a sudden all goes bad, right? You lose it's called a haircut. It's not called a haircut. That's a complete loss. So that's what's sort of being wrestled here. The Greeks always could do that, and that's sort of a problem. And it's not just the Greeks. The Italians, the Spanish, the Portuguese to an extent. The Irish were in this situation, although their situation seems to be sort of has certainly stabilized. And things have gotten better just over the last few years. In fact, I've done this lecture since I've been teaching on the crisis. And I always update the interest rates on the bond market that each nation has to pay on the 10-year bond market, there's lots of different bond markets. There's a 1 year, 5 year, 6 month, I think, 30 year, 10 years, sort of considered it's sort of the standard. And every time I do it, I actually end up lowering the interest rate that a lot of these nations pay. At one point it was, I think I had, the Greeks had to pay 22, and I don't remember what I just had corrected it. I think it's down to, I don't know what it is. I don't remember what I corrected. But all those nations in trouble have actually, every time I go through and I correct them for like the day I upload to Carmen, it's gone down. So things have gotten better. At least the market believes that things have gotten better. So there's just one more video, one more topic, and it will be the final one.